Sometimes the most revealing moments happen when nobody expects them. Not during a red carpet interview. Not during a tearful sit-down special. Just an ordinary Wednesday morning, two people who have shared a couch, a marriage and a television studio for years, talking the way they always do, until one sentence slips out that makes you sit up a little straighter. That's exactly what happened on a recent episode of Live, when Kelly/Ripa turned a light-hearted conversation about pandemic-era routines into something far more personal. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a headline built for outrage. It was something smaller and honestly something more human, the kind of confession that makes you feel like you're not watching a celebrity anymore. You're watching a person. And that distinction matters more than people realize. Here's what happened. Kelly and Mark were reminiscing about the early days of remote broadcasting, back when the world shut down and television had to reinvent itself overnight. For most hosts, that meant awkward home setups, spotty connections, and makeshift studios and living rooms. For Kelly, it apparently meant something a little more relaxed. She admitted, half laughing, that during those months of filming from a laptop screen, the top half of her outfit was fully camera-ready, blouse, hair, makeup, the whole package, while the bottom half was, let's just say, off-duty. Comfort had quietly taken over. It's the kind of admission that could have felt like nothing. A throwaway joke. A quick laugh and a scene change. But it didn't play that way, and that's the part worth sitting with. Because when you watch the exchange back, you notice something in Mark's reaction. He doesn't look shocked. He doesn't look embarrassed for her. He looks entertained in the way only a spouse can be. Someone who already knew the story, who's probably heard it a dozen times over dinner, and who still finds it funny watching her tell millions of strangers. That's not a performance. That's marriage. That's 20+ years of inside jokes finally getting an audience. And maybe that's the real reason this moment traveled the way it did. It wasn't really about pants or the lack of them. It was about permission. Permission to admit that even the most polished, camera-ready people on television were underneath the desk just trying to get through a strange and disorienting chapter like everyone else. Think about what that period actually asked of people. Millions of viewers were doing the exact same thing Kelly described. Dressing for the top half of a video call while staying comfortable below the frame. It became a quiet cultural shorthand for the pandemic itself, the illusion of normalcy from the shoulders up, and total surrender everywhere the camera couldn't reach. When Kelly said it out loud on a national show with her husband sitting right next to her, she wasn't confessing to something shameful. She was naming something universal. And there is real intimacy in being the one who says the thing everybody was quietly doing but nobody wanted to admit. That's what makes Kelly/Ripa such a specific kind of television presence. She has built an entire career on narrowing the distance between famous person and person you know. Other hosts protect a certain mystique. Kelly does the opposite. She tells you about the carb cravings, the language apps she's abandoned 56 weeks in a row, the insecurities that sneak in even after decades of success. And every time she does it, viewers don't think less of her. They lean in closer. There's a psychological reason for that, and it's worth naming directly. Audiences don't fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with recognition, the feeling of watching someone and thinking, that's me, that's my life, that's exactly how I felt. A confession like this one works precisely because it's small. It's not a tragedy. It's not a big reveal. It's a shared, slightly embarrassing, deeply relatable truth, delivered with a laugh instead of a filter. And in a media landscape full of curated perfection, that laugh is disarming in the best possible way. Now layer Mark into that equation and the moment becomes something else entirely, a window into how this particular marriage actually functions on camera. Some celebrity couples treat co-hosting like a business arrangement, careful and choreographed. Kelly and Mark don't operate that way. Watch closely and you'll notice the rhythm between them, the timing of a tease, the willingness to let the other one finish an embarrassing story instead of rescuing them from it, the comfort of two people who trust that nothing said on that couch is going to cause real damage at home. That trust is not something you can fake for a live audience 5 days a week. Either it's there or the cracks eventually show. With Kelly and Mark, it's been there for years, and moments like this confession are the proof. It also says something about how their relationship has evolved from before the cameras were even rolling on this show. They met decades ago on a soap opera set, fell for each other quickly, built a life, raised 3 kids, and somehow ended up narrating their daily domestic life to a national audience every single morning. That's an unusual arc. Most couples don't have to figure out how much of their marriage to share with strangers. Kelly and Mark do it for a living, and the fact that they still seem to enjoy each other, still seem surprised and amused by each other, is arguably the most compelling part of the whole show. The confessions, the teasing, the little moments like this one aren't filler between guest interviews. For a lot of viewers, they are the actual appeal. There's also something worth noting about vulnerability and control. Kelly didn't get caught in this confession. Nobody leaked a photo or dug up an old clip. She chose to share it on her own terms in her own words with a grin on her face. That's a different kind of vulnerability than the kind we usually see in celebrity culture. The kind that's extracted under pressure or revealed through a scandal. This was offered freely. And audiences respond differently to honesty that's given rather than exposed. It reads as confidence instead of confession, even when the word confession is right there in the headline. It's also worth asking why this particular kind of story keeps resurfacing years after the pandemic technically ended. Some viewers noticed that Kelly has returned to this well before, telling variations of the same story across different episodes and different years. That's not repetition for its own sake. It suggests that this memory has become part of how she processes that strange chapter of life, something she can revisit with humor now that the fear and uncertainty of those early lockdown months have faded. Comedy often works that way. We laugh hardest at things that once genuinely unsettled us, once enough time and distance make the laughter safe again. And maybe that's the deeper thread running underneath this whole moment. It's not really a story about wardrobe choices during a pandemic. It's a story about how two people, and by extension a global audience, learn to find lightness inside a genuinely difficult period. Kelly didn't stand in front of a camera and deliver a somber reflection on isolation and uncertainty. She turned it into a joke her husband could laugh at on live television years later, still married, still working together, still choosing to tell that story instead of leaving it behind. There's a lesson in there for anyone paying close attention, and it has very little to do with fashion or format. It's about how couples survive hard chapters. Not by pretending those chapters were easy, but by eventually being able to laugh about the parts that were absurd. The blouse on top, nothing below arrangement wasn't glamorous. It wasn't planned. It was improvised, a little chaotic and completely human. And the fact that Kelly can tell that story now, with Mark grinning beside her, says more about the strength of their partnership than almost any grand romantic gesture could. Viewers picked up on that even if they couldn't quite articulate why the clip stayed with them. It wasn't the confession itself that people kept talking about. It was what the confession represented. Two people who built a life together, weathered something genuinely disorienting, and came out the other side still finding each other funny. Perhaps that's the real reason so many people remain invested in Kelly and Mark. It isn't simply because they've spent decades in the spotlight together. It's because audiences keep catching these small, unscripted glimpses of something real underneath the format. A marriage that still seems to be enjoying itself, even in front of millions of people every single morning. And maybe that's why a moment like this stays with viewers long after the cameras stop rolling and the segment moves on to something else entirely. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Was it the confession itself that stuck with you, or was it everything it revealed about a couple who still, after all these years, seem genuinely delighted by each other? Drop your thoughts below, share your favorite Kelly and Mark moment, and let us know. Do you think honesty like this is what keeps daytime television feeling alive in a world full of polished, guarded interviews?